That was them.
Let me turn this. You can look at my Facebook. I put them on there.
Did you
I don't
really?
know who they were.
The one was holding a sign and the other was right behind him.
I put it. You're gonna know. It's in my Facebook.
Is that right?
Because I go look at this smart little young man.
Yes, indeed. They were.
Okay, we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scott Wiener. I have the honor of representing San Francisco and northern San Mateo County in the California State Senate. I also have the honor of serving as the chair of our California Legislative LGBTQ Caucus, which comprises of our openly LGBTQ members of the legislature. And I'm joined here today by the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, Assembly Member Shirley Weber from San Diego. And we're joined by the vice chairs of both caucuses, Senator Steve Bradford of Los Angeles and Assembly Member Todd Gloria, also of San Diego. And we are here today, our two caucuses coming together to ask Governor Newsom to posthumously pardon Bayard Rustin. Today is exactly 67 years from the date, January 21st, 1953, where Bayard Rustin, who was one of the heroes of the civil rights movement and also a gay man, was arrested in Pasadena for the quote-unquote crime of having consensual sex with other men in a car. And we are asking the governor to pardon Mr. Rustin. Bayard Rustin was truly a hero. He was a key leader in the civil rights movement. He played a key role in organizing the 1963 March on Washington. He was a confidant to Dr. King. He played a role in various direct actions and boycotts throughout the civil rights era, and he was a hero. He also did this in an era where it was not easy to be out as an LGBT person, and although he did not hide his sexual orientation, it was not something that was he announced publicly until later in his life. It was really important to have intersectionality in the civil rights struggle, and having a black gay man who played such a prominent role, I think, is something about which we should all be very, very proud. Unfortunately, Mr. Rustin did fall victim to a homophobic criminal justice system that existed in California and has existed around the country and around the world, where LGBT people forever have been criminalized and pathologized. We know that until very recently in many states in the United States, it was flat out illegal for LGBT people to have sex. Our community has been subjected to prison time for being who we are and, for heaven forbid, being sexually active. We have been subject to prison time for gathering together, which has been illegal in many places over history. We have been subject to capital punishment around the world for being LGBT. We have been subjected to torture, whether it's lobotomies or electric shock therapy or conversion therapy. As long as this community has been around, society has criminalized us in an effort to erase us from the face of the planet. And we have pushed back, and we've made a lot of progress in decriminalizing our community, although there is still a lot of work to do, as we know, even from pending legislation now, to end continuing discrimination against LGBT people on our sex offender registry. And Bayard Rustin did not harm anyone. He simply had sex. And he was arrested, he was prosecuted, he spent 50 days in jail, 50 days in jail for having sex. He was placed on the sex offender registry, and we know how many lives have been destroyed, especially in the LGBT community, for being placed on the sex offender registry simply for having consensual sex. And we know that he was attacked and marginalized in the civil rights movement. Strom Thurmond actually read his criminal record in Congress as a way of delegitimizing the civil rights movement. And California, honestly, this state should be ashamed of itself for how it treated Bayard Rustin and countless other LGBT people who were criminalized simply for being part of our community. We have made a lot of progress in decriminalizing the LGBT community. We have work to do, but today we're asking the governor to take a strong step and to send a profoundly impactful statement by acknowledging that what happened to Bayard Rustin was wrong, that it was harmful, that it is a stain on the state of California, and that Bayard Rustin should be pardoned, and this criminal conviction should be wiped away from his record. And so today, Assemblymember Weber and I are submitting a letter to the governor on behalf of our 2 caucuses making that request. Governor Newsom has been a staunch and long-term ally to the LGBT community. He has led on critical issues of importance to our community, and we know that he will give this full and in-depth consideration. I also want to note the arrest and conviction happened in Los Angeles County, in Pasadena specifically, and we have spoken with the current District Attorney of Los Angeles County, Jackie Lacey, who has expressed her support for this pardon, and will be submitting her own letter to the governor in support of this request. Before I turn it over to Assemblymember Weber, I do want to acknowledge a few other members of our caucuses and of our allies who are here with us today. From Los Angeles, Senator Holly Mitchell, and also from Los Angeles, Assemblymember Wendy Carrillo, and from Los Angeles as well. We have good Los Angeles representation today, Assemblymember Reggie Jones-Sawyer. So thank you all for being here today. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, Assemblymember Shirley Weber.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Wiener, for bringing this forward and bringing it to our attention and our memory. Clearly, this is long overdue, and sometimes we forget those who have made sacrifices for us, and we move on because they no longer are alive with us, and yet we must always go back and make sure that their memories are protected and that we are grateful and show gratitude for what they've done. You know, we just finished the Martin Luther King weekend, the celebration of Dr. King. And sometimes in the process of doing that, we're so focused on one person that we forget the whole civil rights movement, that it's not just one person, but it's a collection of individuals who made tremendous sacrifices for all of us. And Bayard Rustin is one of those. When we think about the civil rights movement, without Bayard Rustin, most of the memorable milestones of the civil rights movement would probably not have taken place. There would probably be no Montgomery bus boycott, as we know, no Selma, no March on Washington, no Civil Rights Act of '64, and no Voting Rights Act of 1965, because it required more than just one person to accomplish that, and he was an integral part of the civil rights movement. King brought the leadership, and he brought the moral authority, and he brought the brilliant oratory to a movement, no doubt about that. But Bayard Rustin brought the people. He helped to organize. He was a brilliant organizer who managed to get nearly 250,000 people to the March on Washington for jobs and freedom without serious incident. He also trained police officers on nonviolent crowd control without using their weapons. And the appalling fact that he was charged and convicted while the 2 white men he was with were not is evidence that he was targeted for public humiliation because of his sexuality, his race, and his position in the movement. He gave he gave the Americans one of the most effective and enduring tools for change, and that is mass passive resistance. Passive resistance forces change without violence, something that removes the moral authority of the establishment that does not want to change, which is why the FBI sought to undermine him in the civil rights movement by using this incident against him. He deserves to be remembered as one of the towering figures in the cause of justice and freedom, both as a black man and as a gay man. As the chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus, I joined Senator Wiener in calling upon the governor to issue a pardon that will ensure his legacy and his place in history is unsullied by this event and this incident. Clearly, we recognize the importance of this for everyone to understand that, yes, this country has a past and a history that is unacceptable. But when we come to the recognition that we were wrong in our practices, it is imperative of us to basically correct whatever we can to make sure that our children know and our children's children know that this was a man of honor, a man who basically helped to give so much to this nation in terms of changing our direction in the area of civil rights. And we honor him today. We have honored him in many ways, but the most important thing we're doing today is asking this governor, who has shown some sensitivity and concern for this issue, to basically pardon, to issue a posthumous pardon of our gentleman, of Bayard Rustin. So I really call upon Governor Newsom to do what we know is right and to right this wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. I now would like to call up the two vice chairs of our caucus, Assemblymember Gloria and Senator Bradford, to make remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my great colleagues from San Diego, Dr. Shirley Weber. You're going to hear from another great San Diegan shortly who helped to bring this issue forward, Nicole Murray-Ramirez. Nicole, thank you for being here and traveling to Sacramento. I will be relatively brief. I just want to lend my voice and to reiterate the California Legislative LGBTQ Caucus's request to Governor Newsom to take this important step. And I see a lot of reporters are here, and I can imagine how you may choose to report this, but you have to put it in some context. There is a whole generation of Bayard Rustins. There is not this man is extraordinary in what he was able to accomplish in his life, despite really swimming upstream his entire life. But there's a whole generation of Californians, of Americans, who, because of our criminal justice systems, actual existence was criminalized. And that was purposeful, because for a lot of us who grew up gay, who grew up as a person of color, you recognize that a lot of society tells you to shut up. We don't want you here. And sometimes the role of government facilitates that erasing and that silencing. Well, how lucky were we to have Bayard Rustin to not take those signals despite the challenges that came with them and continue to persist, to leave this unjust arrest in Los Angeles County, but go on and go forward to create the March on Washington that so many of us spent time commemorating just this past weekend. But not everyone was as strong as Bayard Rustin. Many choose not to have a life like that. They take the signal and they quietly go away. Many lost their life because of these signals that are sent. And that's why this pardon is so very important, to signal to those who endured similar injustices that there is a way to make this right, that they are part of a generation who we hold up as the true trailblazers that they have become, and probably most importantly, to a new generation of LGBT and people of color in this state and in this nation who are not growing up with the same restrictions, but are building a movement with weak foundations if we don't recognize our history. Bayard Rustin is the foundation of our history. He and others helped to create the gains that we've had, and yet their experiences and their accomplishments have been sullied and have been erased because of government interaction. And so we have an opportunity with this request today to change that, to make it somewhat right, not just for Bayard Rustin, but for that whole generation of trailblazing Stonewall generation that we all benefit from, but for this new generation who are not willing to take this kind of treatment, but need to know that they aren't alone. And they're carrying on a proud tradition of really standing up and demanding equality. This benefits all of us. This is not just for the benefit of queer Californians or people of color Californians. This is for everybody. I thank our chairman, Senator Wiener, our chairwoman, Assemblymember Weber, for authoring this letter, with the knowledge that we have a governor that has, for long before it was ever popular, has championed the issues of LGBTQ and civil rights in this state. And so I look forward to a affirmative reaction to this particular letter and a righting of this wrong, and then a continued lifting up of Bayard Rustin's accomplishments that you'll hear about in a moment, I'm sure, because there's more work that must be done to make sure that the movement that we are leading today as an LGBTQ caucus is anchored in a history with a lot of low points, but a lot of positive points. And I thank you again to our chair for this opportunity, and I'll turn it over to my great colleague from Los Angeles, Senator Steve Bradford.
Thank you and good morning. It's truly an honor to be here as the Vice Chair of the Legislative Black Caucus and join Senator Wiener and Assemblywoman Weber in honoring a great man and asking for this pardon of a great American, a great humanitarian. Many people often talk about the March on Washington and the great speech that Dr. King gave, but it took organization to pull those 250,000 people to Washington. And let me tell you, Bayard Rustin did it in 5 weeks, without email, without text, without cell phones, in 5 weeks, and no Twitter. And it was one of the most impressive things this nation has ever experienced. As stated, Dr. King was a great orator, but he would tell you he was not an organizer. He was not the strategist that the civil rights movement needed. It was Bayard Rustin. And the March on Washington in 1963 was not the first organizing campaign by Mr. Rustin. He organized the first March on Washington in 1941 on behalf of the defense industry that was blatantly discriminatory against African Americans. And he joined with A. Philip Randolph. And A. Philip Randolph was the key organizer or head of the March on Washington in 1963, but he only took that role with the understanding that Bayard Rustin would be his deputy. And that's the only reason he took it. He said, I wasn't going to do it unless I brought Bayard Rustin along. And true, many of the individuals in the civil rights movement was adamantly opposed to Bayard being involved, but none of them had the courage. They were even threatened by Adam Clayton Powell, one of my heroes, one of the individuals I respect like no other politician, but it was Adam Clayton Powell who threatened Dr. King and said, if you don't get rid of Bayard Rustin, I will expose and leak a false press release saying that you and Bayard are having a sexual relationship. And Dr. King caved to that pressure. But it was other folks who responded back and said, Adam, we're going to release all the women that we know you've had an affair with. and he backed off of that. But Bayard was beyond his time. He was an individual who we owe a great deal of gratitude to for his courage, his visionary leadership. And what inspired him really to step out as a gay man was an incident that happened on a bus as a young man, and he got on the bus and he was quickly directed to go to the back of the bus, as most African Americans were directed in the 40s and the 50s. And if it wasn't for a little white kid that grabbed his tie, and the mother says, don't you ever touch an N-word. And he decided right then, if he went to that back of the bus, that little white kid would grow accustomed to seeing black folks walking to the back of the bus as if they accepted it. And he refused to go to the back of the bus. And he sat there and he says, I'm willing to be arrested to show this kid that I'm going to stand up. And it was because of that incident that he says, not only do I have to stand up as a black man, I have to stand up as a gay man in this country. And I can no longer deny who I am. So we thank Bayard Rustin for his leadership, and we hope the governor does the right thing and pardon an individual. Even Ronald Reagan recognized the great contributions of Bayard Rustin, as well as President Barack Obama. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And I do want to, Assemblymember Gloria was correct in terms of this isn't just about Bayard Rustin, it's about generations of LGBT people, and particularly gay men, who have been criminalized. And I will tell you that after we did our first reform of the sex offender registry, the number of older gay men in their 70s and 80s who came up to me and said, I've never talked about this before, but I was arrested 30, 40, 50 years ago, and I've been on the sex offender registry ever since for having consensual sex, and it's ruined my life. And this has impacted so many people. Our final speaker I want to call up is one of our truly great leaders in California, Nicole Mary Ramirez, who will, I'm sure, talk about the effort to have a stamp for Bayard Rustin and to really honor him in the way he deserves to be honored. And this whole idea, actually, it was last fall. Nicole was up in San Francisco, and in that Nicole way, summoned me to have breakfast. And so I went and we had breakfast because Nicole asked you to come, you go. And we had breakfast, and Nicole brought up Bayard Rustin and the work that's happening, and we started talking about the arrest and the conviction, and we decided, hey, let's get him pardoned. That's where it started. And so, Nicole, come on up.
Good afternoon, buenos dias. As you can see, I don't work computers or I'm used to typewriters. As I've been saying for the last decades, as a Latino and LGBTQ activist, a community, indeed a civil rights movement, that does not know where it came from or whose shoulders they stand on, doesn't really know where it's going. On behalf of the oldest LGBTQ organization in North America, the International Imperial Court System, founded in 1965 in San Francisco by World War II veteran and the first openly gay candidate to run for public office in 1961, Jose Julio Sierra, and the oldest LGBTQ civil rights organization, the National LGBTQ Task Force in Washington, and the National Bayard Rustin U.S. Postage Stamp Campaign. And I want to acknowledge some people who have come all the way here. Stephen Dorsey, who's national chair of the Bayard Rustin Stamp Campaign, our national co-chair, Terry Seide, Michael Kennedy, and the president of the International Court Council, John Carrillo. Thank you for coming. And thank you, and God bless you, Senator Scott Wiener, for remembering our courageous and beloved Bayard Rustin. And thank you to the LGBTQ Legislative Caucus and the Black Caucus, especially my longtime friend, Dr. Shirley Weber, who is a recipient of a Bayard Rustin honor herself, for standing up. I come from a time, the 1950s, the McCarthy era, and the 1960s, when homosexuality was against the law, when at a stroke of a pen, with the signature of your parents or a judge, homosexuals were committed to state mental hospitals, often subjected to electric shock treatment or lobotomies. I personally know and knew many friends who returned from those hospitals never the same. I come from a time that police brutality and the targeting of homosexuals, entrapments, beatings, raids, and the false arrest of homosexuals were commonplace. Many lives ruined, fired from jobs, disowned by family, suicides. Many were my friends. Homosexuality was not made legal in California until 1976. It was in this environment and these dark times of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s that Bayard Rustin, Jose Julio Sierra, Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon, Frank Kameny, Harvey Milk, Reverend Troy Perry, Barbara Giddings, Robin Tyler, Cleve Jones, Jess Jessup, Gloria Johnson, Morris Kite, Elaine Noble, Mandy Carter, and many others were fighting for social justice and equality. Many who are no longer with us. And now I have the honor of reading a message from Bayard's longtime beloved partner who lives in New York and couldn't be with us today, Walter Nago himself, a respected civil rights leader. Dear Senator Wiener, I'm writing to express my support for your effort to have my late partner, Bayard Rustin, pardoned by Governor Gavin Newsom for a 1953 conviction on a morals charge. Although Bayard passed away in 1987, such a pardon would be a symbolic gesture recognizing a violation of the concept of equal justice under the law. During the 1950s, gay men were victimized by laws that were not equally applied to heterosexuals. The rampant homophobia of our society led to stigmatization of gay men, often resulting in the loss of employment, damage, and relationships. Bayard, who was an activist in the fight for universal human rights for more than 60 years, was a confident and courageous individual and did not let that arrest center him from his life's work. Despite attempts by the enemies of freedom and civil rights to silence him, sadly, many others who were victims of laws enacted during that homophobic period did not fare so well. I am grateful to the work that you have done in California to advance an agenda of civil rights and equality for all, an agenda that reflects the values of Bayard and his close associate, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Do let me know if there's anything I can do to support this effort. Sincerely yours, Walter Nago, the surviving partner of Bayard Rustin. Thank you again, Senator Wiener, the LGBT and Black Caucus. God bless you all. I'll just leave it.
Thank you, Nicole. I also want to acknowledge with us here today is Tammy Martin from Equality California. Equality California is our community's advocate in the state capitol, so thank you, Tammy. So that concludes our press conference today. We're happy to answer any questions here or on the side. And again, thank you to everyone. And I want to thank our staff, too, my own staff in my office, as well as the staff to the Black Caucus and the LGBTQ Caucus for making this happen. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, my dear.